from Southern California. Public Broadcasting's David Brancaccio.
Welcome to Now. The election calendar begins in less than a month, but already the 2008 campaign is delivering a few surprises. One of those is the highly unusual, largely internet-based presidential campaign of Republican Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. He is not your ordinary candidate, and neither are his supporters, from anti-war progressives to anti-tax libertarians, civil liberties types, and even some white supremacists. How did all this political gumbo end up in the same pot? We dove into Ron Paul Nation, the internet movement that's gone viral, by tapping into the discontent and anger of voters. But can that unfettered rage in the virtual world translate into anything that approaches practical policies in the real world? Senior correspondent Maria Hinojosa and producer Carla Murphy have our report.
On a chilly Saturday afternoon, several thousand people have come to Philadelphia to see Ron Paul, the Republican congressman from Texas who's running for president. One of those people is Eli Hughes. He's never been to a political rally before, but that changed one day when he was surfing on the internet.
I think I was on YouTube looking for some kind of guitar video or something.
He stumbled across a video like this one about Ron Paul.
We have allowed our nation to be overtaxed and overregulated and overrun by bureaucrats.
Just hearing the man speak sold me. It wasn't a highly charismatic, kind of speech like a lot of the other candidates give out. He was just speaking truth, and, I was impressed by that.
Ron Paul has managed to not just impress people, but change them from apathetic observers to active supporters. And he hasn't done it with hugs and handshakes or the help of the mainstream media. The Ron Paul movement was born and bred on the power of the internet.
It has been said that there were 2 or 3 dozen spammers out there running the campaign, and it looks like there's a lot more.
Ron Paul's anti-war, anti-tax, anti-big government, libertarian message has whipped up some passionate supporters. Many had never been active in politics before.
He's the man!
By taking the internet by storm, they've raised millions of dollars and transformed his campaign from cash-strapped to cash magnet. And that flood of money has helped turn Ron Paul into a wild card in the upcoming primaries.
Hey, Ronnie!
Ron Paul's unexpected rise has stunned the political establishment. But is the country ready for Ron Paul Nation? At this bar in Chicago, a Ron Paul meetup group is learning how to collect petitions. Meetups are gatherings of people with similar interests, from poodles to politics. They find each other online and then meet up. Brian Costin is the meetup organizer.
He is willing to stand up for the Constitution, even when it's unpopular.
Ron Paul's strict interpretation of the Constitution to protect against government abuse has earned him his nickname, Dr. No. He voted no against the Iraq War, no against a federal ban on same-sex marriage, no against sending money to Hurricane Katrina victims, and no against the Patriot Act. In the age of flip-flopping politicians, Brian Costin was drawn to Paul's unwavering ideology.
There's a lot of people that don't agree with every one of his issues, but are more passionate about Ron Paul than they have been about any other candidate that they've ever had. And I think that comes from his principled consistency.
Welcome to Texas Congressman and Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul. Congressman, great to have you here. Good morning.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We caught up with Ron Paul on the campaign trail at this local radio station in Charleston, South Carolina, and spoke with the 10-term congressman and former obstetrician in one of their studios.
Congressman, people like to say that you are Dr. No. You are the contrarian. You say no to many things. So what does that look like with you as a president?
Everything you say no to, you say yes to something else. If I say no to paper money, I say yes to sound money. If I say no to foreign intervention and preemptive war, I say yes to peace and commerce. I'm saying no to something that people are very disgusted with, and it's runaway big government.
In the early stages of his campaign, Ron Paul was having a difficult time getting his message out. He had no name recognition and no money to pay for ads. And what little attention he was getting from mainstream media journalists wasn't helping much.
What's success for you in this campaign?
What's success? Well, to win is one is the goal.
That's not going to happen.
But even though mainstream media wasn't taking him seriously, Ron Paul was converting more and more believers to his cause.
Most of the campaigns have distributed tasks, and the Ron Paul campaign has distributed power. And that's a far more intoxicating and exciting kind of distribution to be a part of.
Zephyr Teachout was Howard Dean's online organizer and is now a visiting professor at Duke University. She says the easiest way to distribute power is on the internet, but most campaigns aren't using the web in that way.
Almost all the candidates this cycle have tended strongly towards the managerial use of the internet, the Coca-Cola use. Let's make the best site we can. I call them Stepford sites. And you come to those as a citizen and you feel like this is very nicely done and I don't belong here. There's no role for me as a thinking, creative person.
Ron Paul's website was sending a different message.
It was very bare bones. There wasn't any social networking sites on it. It was just a very, very basic page.
Unlike the big-name contenders backed with huge war chests and an army of political strategists, Ron Paul didn't have much to work with. So his supporters took it upon themselves to plaster Paul's message all over the internet. The no rules and no authorities nature of the internet has long made it a home for libertarian ideas. So it's no surprise that a lot of Ron Paul supporters were already wired up and web savvy.
It's time to take these videos to the next level.
They posted incessantly on blogs, created hundreds and hundreds of Ron Paul videos on YouTube, and voted relentlessly on internet polls. Ron Paul has over 70,000 people signed up for Ron Paul meetup groups all over the country, way more than any other presidential candidate. But even though Paul was getting massive online traffic, Teachout says mainstream media was more concerned with fundraising numbers.
When Ron Paul supporters say, well, we have more YouTube views than anybody else, and the New York Times says, well, so-and-so raised more money than anybody else, it's not clear why we should, as Democrats, small d Democrats, value one more than the other.
Teachout says the way campaigns have traditionally worked is that money raised translates into TV ads, which translates into votes. But, she says, in the age of the internet, maybe we need to rethink that equation.
Well, did I ever think I'd be a part of it? No.
Enter Trevor Lyman. He works in the internet business and has just uprooted his entire life from Miami Beach to New Hampshire just to help Ron Paul.
There's a slogan that goes around on signs that says, Dr. Paul cured my apathy.
In fact, in his 37 years, Lyman has never voted once.
It's a big leap from being somebody who never voted to suddenly changing your whole life because of a candidate.
It does go to the war, and the fact that not only are our soldiers dying, but innocent people are dying.
There are other anti-war candidates.
But then there was 2006, and they all switched their story. We gave them the opportunity to end this war.
You feel betrayed by the Democrats?
Absolutely. I feel betrayed by Congress as a whole. Absolutely.
The best commitment we can make to the Iraqi people is to give them their country back. That's the most important thing that we can do.
Ron Paul's fierce and consistent opposition to the war in Iraq has set him far apart from the other Republican candidates. But Lyman didn't find out about Ron Paul from watching the debates. He was on the website MySpace, a social networking site, and he noticed that people were changing their personal profiles into Ron Paul profiles.
And so basically you started seeing Ron Paul's picture everywhere.
Lyman became a fervent supporter and decided to help Ron Paul raise some money. So he put his internet skills to work and set up a website for a one-day fundraiser called thisnovember5th.com. Brian Costin remembers that day.
I was on Ron Paul's website watching this banner go up and up and up. You thought it was going to slow down. You thought it was going to slow down and people were going to stop donating, and it didn't stop through the entire day, and it was just incredible.
When it was all over, they broke the record, raising $4.2 million, the most money ever raised online in a single day. Mainstream media took notice.
A fundraising bonanza.
It's an amazing sum of money. I don't remember someone doing that out on the campaign trail.
Ron Paul, Wolf, had a good day yesterday, a very good day. The Republican...
When you saw what happened, $4.2 million in a day, when you found out, what was your reaction?
Well, it was a tremendous surprise. You know, how did they do this? Some put up signs that I have removed their apathy, and I respond by saying, "Well, you've eliminated my skepticism."
According to Ron Paul's campaign, 37,000 people contributed about $100 each that day, and 20,000 of them were new contributors. These are amazing numbers, but what makes this fundraiser so unique is that Ron Paul's campaign had nothing to do with it.
Did the Ron Paul campaign ever get in touch with you?
I've never met him, and I've only spoken with him once on the phone, and this was
You've never
afterwards.
met Ron Paul?
No.
But you raised $4.2 million for him?
Sure, I played my role, but it was all of us, you know.
This is central to Ron Paul's campaign. They let their supporters do whatever they want. One guy paid for this full-page ad in USA Today. This couple turned their van into a Ron Paul mobile, and supporters are coming up with their own campaign slogans, like the Ron Paul Revolution.
This appeals to everybody's, independence. It's a small sign, but it means big, big things.
And that kind of independence has created a lot of excited and dedicated supporters.
Do you think, though, that there's a danger, because your campaign is not top-down, that people essentially can say and do with you whatever they want? You're not managing that.
No, and it's risky. Freedom is risky. Sometimes people send me money and their lifestyle is something I don't like and don't agree with.
It's true. Ron Paul has some controversial supporters, including a brothel owner and white supremacists. They're attracted to his message of small government with few regulations. But Ron Paul doesn't think he should give any of their money back.
Should our main task be going through there and checking on 65,000 people and what their personal beliefs are? It's impossible. I got their money away from them. So it's a plus, because I'm going to spend it for what I consider a very positive thing.
But you could make a statement now that says, I do not want any white supremacists.
I don't. I think the philosophy of white supremacy is completely wrong. It's immoral.
So you do not want white supremacist groups supporting your campaign?
No, I don't, because it just muddies the water. So why would I want their money? I don't need it.
Until now, Ron Paul has never said publicly that he doesn't want contributions from white supremacists.
I'm Ron Paul, and I'm running for president.
But now that he's flush with cash, Ron Paul is running ads in New Hampshire, the site of the first primary next month, and his poll numbers are beginning to rise.
I say we need Ron Paul for president.
If Ron Paul could win any primary, New Hampshire would be the place. His libertarian ideas resonate well in the live free or die state. But what would a Ron Paul world really look like?
So paint a picture of a big American city and what it looks like with you as a libertarian Republican in office. How does it function?
Well, the federal government would just be out of that city. They wouldn't be there.
And he means it. Ron Paul wants the government out of almost every aspect of our lives. If he got his way, he would dismantle a lot of federal programs.
The Federal Reserve?
Yes, eventually, but I'm not for turning it off in one day.
The U.S. Department of Education?
Oh, yes, I would do that.
Income tax?
Oh, yeah, that's high on my agenda. But if you want no IRS and no big government, you have to assume responsibility for yourself. That means that if you don't take care of yourself, you can't come begging and crawling and using force to take something from your neighbor. You're responsible for yourself.
Well, the idea that government, if it isn't done at the national level, will be done more locally, that's one of the libertarian creeds.
David Epstein teaches political science at Columbia University. He says Ron Paul's philosophy of a lot less government and more personal responsibility ignores the reality of the society we live in.
Part of it is that everybody can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and everybody should take responsibility for their lives. The problem with that is that not everybody starts at the same starting point.
Epstein says people come from different backgrounds. They don't have the same access to education or health care or make the same income. But he says the role of the federal government has been to help level the playing field.
when it comes down to it, Americans agree there should be some social safety net. So to emphasize the personal responsibility part without saying that government also has some responsibility to help people when they're down is, I think, losing half the equation.
But Epstein says in the current political climate, it's no surprise that Ron Paul's message has attracted a lot of committed supporters.
A lot of the Ron Paul supporters now are very angry. They're looking at the political process and they're thinking they've been duped, they've been lied to, they haven't been told the truth. They don't see either party really fighting hard for their rights, and they think now's the time for them to take back government.
And it's that feeling that drives this meetup group in New Jersey to get together every week. They've been gathering religiously for the past 6 months. Today, they're making more signs for their weekly rally.
When I got involved in June, there was virtually no media coverage at all. And since I've been standing out in the corner every weekend since June and just doing this and really spreading the word, now there's a lot more coverage, and it's really great. So I really believe that we're making a difference.
Most campaigns work to connect more supporters with the candidate. But Zephyr Teachout says Ron Paul supporters are connecting more with each other. And that's a new way of building a political movement.
The funny thing about the Ron Paul campaign is he's like a little dot here in the middle. And all the support and excitement and creativity and generativity is out here. And that's he's not going to win the presidency. But that's a really powerful structure and probably will outlast the campaign.
Back in New Hampshire, Trevor Lyman is helping plan an even bigger one-day fundraiser on December 16th, appropriately on the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. They hope to set another new money-making record. But will Ron Paul's ideas have any lasting political impact?
What's your greatest fear about what's going to happen in the presidential elections? I mean, if Ron Paul doesn't win.
It's not about Ron Paul. It's about this message. It's about this idea of returning to the principles of America.
For more about this story, go to pbs.org. With the end of 2007 fast upon us, I wanted to take a moment to remember the passing this year of the great American writer, and I think it's fair to say great social critic. Kurt Vonnegut died this year at the age of 84. His last long-form TV interview was here on Now, and during our conversation, he shared characteristically vivid and cantankerous observations about our environment and our politics going to hell in a handbasket. But during that last interview, Vonnegut mentioned an idea that might help fix the world, a suggestion that stayed with me.
Look, I'll tell you, it's one thing that no cabinet had ever had is a Secretary of the Future. And there are no plans at all for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
All right, Mr. Vonnegut, you're on. What about a cabinet-level position to make sure our actions now don't wreck it for future generations? Joining me here in California is a man who's kept his eye on the future for a long time. John Perry Barlow, founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a fellow emeritus with the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard Law School, and famed lyricist for the Grateful Dead. Mr. Barlow, good to see you.
Good to see you.
A minister of the future. What might that cabinet-level person's portfolio be?
If somebody were just in charge of taking the trajectories that we know about and said, all right, if they go on, where do we end up and what does that do to our grandchildren? It would make a big difference. I think we don't have a very good visualization factor in the government. And, basically we've got a cabinet that consists entirely of ministers of the past. They predict the past, almost without exception.
You give this minister of the future, maybe one of our viewers could invent this, a watch that has a real-time readout of the national debt. 9.1 trillion today. Remind these people of it.
There are these old couples that travel around with RVs and a bumper sticker that says, we're spending our grandchildren's inheritance. And as a country, we are doing this to an extent that I think is astonishingly profligate and immoral.
I suppose the minister of the future could look at the environment. I mean, often we talk about climate change. It'll cost too much to rectify climate change. Minister of the future could have a different view.
I mean, I spent a couple of days with James Lovelock recently, and he said that even if we did everything right, I mean, even if we cut CO2 emissions back to let's say, 1960 levels, we would still be confronting a situation where sometime in the next decade, there are going to be 100 million Bangladeshis without a place to be. We're not taking the preparatory steps that I think these kinds of eventualities just cry out for. And somebody's got to be thinking about this stuff.
Well, you'd think we'd wake up to it, the voters, but typically many of us can't see anything past the noses on our face.
Well, we find the future so terrifying at the moment, when we do bother to think about it, that it's much easier to just keep your head down.
Maybe the media is partly to blame, and in part for this lack of future tense.
Well, I think it is directly to blame for the thing that drives it more than anything else, which is fear. The media makes its living by selling the attention of the audience to the advertisers. And as such, it has a strong impetus to elevate human attention, which is relatively easy to do. I mean, you just go right straight to the amygdala and the hypothalamus and hit it with stuff that has worked since we were reptiles, which is fear, sexuality, and violence. The problem is most people now create their entire sense of the world on the basis of this informational map and not anything experiential because they're too scared to go out and experience very much.
I think you wrote that we have in this country government by hallucinating mob.
Well, absolutely. I mean, check it out. I mean, people they're completely caught in the television hallucination. And that's how they're making their decisions about politics.
Well, you talk about fear. There are statistics that show that there's a lot of insecurity out there among Americans. A lot of it's economic insecurity. They're not sure if they're going to have health care. People worry about whether or not they're going to have a job tomorrow. And in those circumstances, it may be harder for our minister of the future to talk about what may lie ahead when what lies now is so insecure.
But it's irresponsible not to. I mean, because another one of those lines that you can chart pretty well is what's going to happen to the Social Security fund when everybody in my generation is on Social Security and starts to really need it from the standpoint of failing health.
Well, that'll be something for the minister of the future to grow gray hairs over. It's just that in itself.
I mean, it's simply irresponsible not to be thinking about what we do at that point, and selling these sort of free market alternatives, even though I'm a free marketeer, at this stage of the game doesn't make a lot of sense. We can't just suddenly switch over and abandon millions of people.
Well, see, it's happening right now. We're talking about potential problems in the future, and our heads are starting to hurt. It's often ugly, some of the stuff.
But, you know, it's a lot easier to enter the future with a prepared mind, even if it surprises you.
Well, John Perry Barlow, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David.
And speaking of the future, next week on Now, we look at a housing program that's being tried in hundreds of cities across America. Can the cure for the hardcore homeless be as simple as handing out apartments, no strings attached? What did you think when they told you that?
I said, oh man, it can't be for real.
And that's it for now. From Los Angeles, I'm David Brancaccio. We'll see you next week.
To order this episode of PBS,